Hospitality can mean a lot of different things, from hosting elaborate dinner parties to offering a thirsty traveler a sip of water in the desert. This Sunday, I hope to expand our idea of hospitality a little bit, to think more about the immaterial essentials of life that we share. In ancient times, and still today in remote areas of the world, hospitality is very concrete. Because of the extreme difficulty of the natural environment, people depended on one another deeply just to survive. The Hebrew Bible and the New Testament are full of stories of hospitality. Maybe the earliest and probably the most important story of hospitality is a story of Abraham and Sarah being visited by 4 strangers. Abraham was sitting in his tent taking cover from the heat of the day. Now remember, this is around Syria or Jordan or Israel. The heat of the day is pretty fierce. And these strangers came upon his home. Abraham quickly sat them under a shade tree and washed their feet. Again, imagine traveling through the desert by foot and having your feet washed in the midst of that journey. Not only would it feel amazing, but it's also pretty necessary to stay healthy and safe. Then he asked his wife, Sarah, to prepare a meal to share together. Abraham ate with the travelers as was the custom, and before they left, they asked about Sarah. Abraham explained that she was in the tent. And they said that they would return in about a year, and in that time, she would be pregnant. As she was overhearing this, she started laughing at this absurd idea, not only for strangers to say, you'll be pregnant in a year, but also about her age. It's written that Sarah was 90 and Abraham was 101 years old when Isaac was born. Okay, we take those numbers with a grain of salt. But it's fair to say that this was a heck of a surprise for this couple. Now, the role of God in this passage isn't really explicit. It seems, though, that Abraham's willingness to welcome strangers was a bit of a test, a big test. This isn't just an unlikely pregnancy, remember. In the Jewish tradition, it's that lineage of Abraham to Isaac that is the foundation of the whole community. Hospitality was the test for the creation of a community. There are lots of stories of hospitality in the Bible, because in the desert, it's not for the sake of being fancy. To extend hospitality to a stranger meant keeping them alive. If a community was going to survive in the ancient world, it had to have a strong tradition of caring. Even today, in some places, here in the United States, hospitality has the same role of survival. Not everyone knows this, but Bev Huff is an incredible outdoors woman. I have never witnessed her in Alaska, but I have heard stories. For decades, her family has maintained a rustic home in rural Alaska. I'm talking really rural, like grizzly bears and outhouses. You have to take a boat to get to her home and launch it on the beach at the correct time or you'll be washed away. It's madness. Anyway, Bev has talked about the great diversity of folks that live out here in this rural area of Alaska. Many different opinions, to say the least. But still, the neighbors cooperate wholeheartedly to help one another because they know that in such a wild place, survival really depends on mutual support and hospitality. In the most basic ways, we need one another to protect ourselves from the elements and just to have food and water to drink. But humanity cannot live on bread alone. More than our basic material needs, we also need the emotional support of human community to thrive. I imagine most of you saw the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks. He plays a Federal Express executive who finds himself as the sole survivor on a deserted island. And there's a battle to survive. A good portion of that battle is physical, but an almost equal portion is emotional. His profound loneliness leads him to transform a volleyball into a doll of sorts that plays kind of a second character. Now, this is an extreme example. None of us anticipate landing on a deserted island. The movie's a helpful reminder, though, that isolation is deadly. And isolation can happen to all of us. In our daily lives, in a sea of people, the world can be a very lonely place. There's a whole growing field of research about loneliness, and the numbers are very sobering, especially in America and in Europe. In the recent decades, it has increased dramatically. 40 years ago, only 10 to 20% of people said that they felt lonely on a regular basis. That number has increased to 45% in 2010. That's a massive change in our well-being. Today, it's estimated that 1 in 5 Americans suffer from persistent loneliness. It's a pretty unpleasant emotional state. It also exacerbates other emotional health issues like anxiety or depression. But I was fascinated to learn about the physical impacts. Feeling persistent loneliness increases risk of death by 26%. Now, this is an important clarification. People aren't falling over dead of loneliness. It's not quite that dramatic. But it makes existing health conditions much more dangerous. People experiencing loneliness are twice as likely to die if they have heart disease. And the same goes for obesity. Now, we may have plenty of food to eat and houses to keep us warm, even luxury cars or designer clothing, but we still need one another's hospitality to stay alive in this world. My hope is that we'll begin to see the fundamental necessity of hospitality. It's not quite as obvious as meeting a nomad in the desert who asks for a drink of water, but the people in our midst need us to open our hearts. For most of us, when the word hospitality comes to mind, we think of hosting someone, either in our homes or at our tables. We literally make a space for them. I want to stretch that idea of making space a little bit for the kind of hospitality that we're talking about today. We're kind of making room for people in our hearts. That comes with a healthy amount of risk. The less we know someone, the riskier the proposition becomes. It's very similar to inviting someone into our homes. Offering hospitality to our friends and family is, well, it's not that scary. But opening our hearts to strangers comes with a little bit higher level of risk. As neighbors in a suburban wilderness, though, we can find a little bit of courage, I hope. I think that being held in someone's heart is a very special kind of hospitality. It's a refuge for our soul. This is one of the reasons that every Sunday we pause to name the joys and sorrows of this congregation aloud. Some of them don't even get named. and we pause to let one another know that we're thinking about them, that we've made space in our hearts for one another. For your joys, we join you in celebration. For your sorrows and concerns, may you feel our compassion. May the caring of our beloved community sustain you. This is a spiritual practice, opening our hearts for people. It's even more powerful in a one-on-one form. And there are two simple pieces, not always easy, but pretty simple. One is actually opening room in our hearts, opening our hearts to the suffering or the joy of someone else. That's kind of dangerous, but we can be brave. The second piece of this kind of hospitality is letting someone know. Let them know that you care, that you're concerned, or that you're happy for them. It's not fixing the problem, but letting them know that you're holding them in your heart. I'm thinking of you. You're in my prayers. Or I'm so happy for you. When we really mean those words, they can be golden. Maybe it's simpler. Maybe it's a pat on the back or knowing eye contact. Through the real trials of our suburban lives, hospitality of the heart can be simple and sustaining. Now, part of the power of hospitality, I think, is that it's personal. Yeah, we could go to a restaurant and have a nice meal, but that's not really hospitality if you're paying for it. Being invited to the table is so much more meaningful when you're invited to a family recipe or something that's unique to that family. It's the uniqueness of the food, the table, the home. These are what make hospitality special. And when we host someone, we play up to our strengths. We pick a recipe that we know works, right? The same is true for hospitality of the heart. We each have something unique to offer from our heart. It's part of our personality and our background and the culture that we come from. It may be humor or compassion or listening. Maybe you're a great storyteller. It's worth knowing what your comfort recipe is. My sense of hospitality is pretty quiet. It's mostly a gift of listening. I know this about myself. I'm not the best storyteller or the funniest person in the world, but I'm a pretty good listener and a quiet person. In training for ministry, I spent a few months doing hospital chaplaincy. And all day was an exercise in offering comfort in whatever way could be found. My quietness didn't fit everyone's needs, and I could be chatty when I needed to. But I'll never forget a woman who found my quiet presence very comforting. She said it was like having an angel there in the room just watching. So it's worth thinking about. What's your most reliable recipe when someone needs soul nourishment? It's the uniqueness that makes it special. It's the personal touch that makes hospitality powerful. And it is powerful. We can easily forget the power that we have to affect someone else's day. When we're rushed or a little bit cranky or think, can someone just be courteous to me for one moment? We forget that we too have the opportunity to offer someone else a better day. It doesn't take an act of Congress or solving the nuclear crisis with North Korea. to offer someone a better day. Just as easily as we can offer a drink of water to a traveler in the desert, we have the emotional resources to offer a moment of hospitality to help another human being in this journey. Now, finally, it bears mentioning whom we're providing hospitality to. I've grown to really like the word neighbor this year. You may have noticed me using it a lot in sermons or in writings. I like it because it has a few different meanings. For one, we have literal neighbors who at least I could do a better job of caring for and getting to know. They may be folks at the gym, though, or the people we see at the grocery store. Our neighbors may be the people who don't have a house but have set up camp in our town. I like the word neighbor because it gets us thinking beyond family and friends, and it suggests someone that's different from our immediate tribe, but close at hand. Our neighbor may have a different lifestyle or different politics, but we all share the same neighborhood, and we all want to be happy and healthy in it. In the ancient world or in the wilderness, we knew we needed one another to survive. Slowly, we're learning that the same fundamental need for hospitality sticks with us, even here in the suburbs. Amen.